Have you ever considered how governments throughout history have used the potent weapon of words to control society? The power of words is immense and immeasurable, a force that can be harnessed to shape public opinion, to sway minds and hearts, and to guide or misguide the masses. Words, you see, are not merely a means of communication, they are the architects of reality, the builders of perception. They can build bridges of understanding or walls of division. They can ignite wars or broker peace. Words carry with them the power to create and, conversely, the power to destroy. In the hands of a skilled orator, words become a tool, a weapon even, that can be used to manipulate, to control, to influence. Now let's turn our attention to governments, the ruling bodies that govern societies. Governments, irrespective of their form, have one thing in common: they seek to maintain order, to ensure stability. And words, propaganda, language manipulation, these are all tools in their arsenal, tools that they use with surgical precision to shape public opinion, to maintain control. The term propaganda may carry negative connotations, bringing to mind images of totalitarian regimes and dictatorial rulers. But let's not be hasty in our judgment. Propaganda, in its essence, is nothing more than information, often of a biased or misleading nature, used to promote a political cause or point of view. The use of propaganda, the manipulation of language, is not exclusive to autocratic regimes. It is a tool employed by governments worldwide, a tool that has been used throughout history to control society. So how does this manipulation occur? How do words become a tool for control? How are they wielded by governments to shape public opinion, to maintain order, to control society? To answer these questions, we must journey back in time, starting with the powerful institution of the Catholic Church, a prime example of how words have been used as a tool for control. Let's embark on a journey through time, starting with the Catholic Church, to see how words have been used as a tool for control. The Catholic Church in the Middle Ages was the first to use propaganda on a massive scale. From the towering spires of grand cathedrals to the humble parish churches dotting every town and hamlet, the Catholic Church held sway over the hearts and minds of the populace. Its most potent tool, the Latin language. Latin, the language of the Church, was a language not understood by the masses. It was a language of mystery, of power, and of control. The clergy, educated in Latin and privy to its secrets, were able to control the narrative. They could interpret the Bible as they saw fit, shaping the understanding of their congregation according to their own designs. The Church's influence extended beyond the pulpit. They held a monopoly over education, with monastic schools being the primary source of learning in the Middle Ages. Here, the Church could control what was taught, ensuring that the narrative they sought to uphold was perpetuated. The masses, unable to read or understand Latin, were largely dependent on the Church for their understanding of the world and their place within it. This dependency allowed the Church to shape their worldview, using language as a powerful tool of manipulation and control. Through the use of Latin, the Church was able to maintain its grip on power. They could dictate the narrative, control the information, and manipulate the beliefs of their followers. This was propaganda in its earliest form, a subtle yet powerful method of control that relied not on force, but on the manipulation of language and information. The Church's use of Latin and control over education set the stage for the dawn of propaganda. It showed that language could be used as a tool of control, a means of maintaining power, and a method of shaping the beliefs and values of the masses. The Church set a precedent, demonstrating the effectiveness of language manipulation and propaganda. As nation-states emerged, governments recognized the power of words and propaganda. This recognition wasn't a novel idea, but rather an inspiration drawn from the most influential institution of the time, the Catholic Church. Just as the Church used religious texts to guide and shape the beliefs of its followers, governments began to understand that through language they too could mold the opinions and beliefs of their citizens. Early nation-states realized that a unified narrative could foster a sense of national identity and loyalty. Governments started creating stories of national heroes, victories, and shared struggles. These tales of triumph and tribulation were often embellished or even completely fabricated, yet they served their purpose, creating a collective memory, a shared history that bound the citizens together. However, the manipulation of language went beyond the creation of national narratives. Governments also began to twist the interpretation of real historical events, presenting them in a light that suited their agenda. They realized that the control of history was not about the truth, but about perception. Let's take an example. A war that was a crushing defeat could be spun into a heroic stand against overwhelming odds. A controversial policy could be painted as a necessary sacrifice for the greater good. By controlling the interpretation of events, governments could shape public opinion in their favor, even when the reality was starkly different. This strategic use of language and narrative manipulation wasn't just about maintaining control, it was also about ensuring survival. A government that could rally its people behind a cause, no matter how contentious, was a government that could weather political storms. As the nation-states grew in power and influence, so too did their mastery of language and propaganda. They realized that words could be weapons, narratives could be shields, and control over the past could determine the future. The control of the narrative became a crucial tool for the ruling class. And as we'll see in the next scenes, this tool would only become more sophisticated and potent as time marched on. The 20th century witnessed propaganda being used extensively during times of conflict. Indeed, the two world wars and the Cold War that punctuated this era saw governments employ fear and nationalism as potent tools of manipulation. Let's take a quick jaunt back to the early part of the 20th century. With the onslaught of the First World War, propaganda became a cornerstone of wartime strategy. Governments, particularly those of the Allied powers, used it to stoke the fires of nationalism, painting their enemies as monstrous villains and their own cause as a righteous crusade. This narrative was so compelling that it not only rallied their citizens for war, but also swayed public opinion to support their cause. Fast forward a couple of decades and we see the Second World War, where propaganda took on an even darker turn. This time it was not just about creating an enemy, but about dehumanizing entire groups of people. The Holocaust, one of history's most horrifying genocides, was made possible in part due to the systematic propagation of anti-Semitic propaganda by the Nazis. And then, as the dust of the Second World War settled, the world found itself in the throes of the Cold War. Here, propaganda was used not just to demonize the enemy, but to instill a deep-seated fear of nuclear warfare. The United States and the Soviet Union each painted the other as a looming threat to world peace, creating an atmosphere of fear and suspicion that lasted for decades. In each of these instances, it's clear that propaganda was not just a tool for shaping the narrative around a conflict. More than that, it was a means of exercising control over the population, of bending societal will to the objectives of the government. Fear and nationalism were used to rally support, quell dissent, and keep citizens in line. So, as we reflect on the 20th century, we see a period marked by manipulation and control, with propaganda at the helm. It shows us how narratives can be twisted, how fear can be weaponized, and how nationalism can be exploited. The 20th century gave us clear examples of how narratives can be manipulated to control society. In the Middle East, the use of propaganda has been particularly prevalent. This region has a rich tapestry of history, culture, and politics, and in that mix, the tool of propaganda has been wielded with significant effect. Consider the role of state-controlled media. In many Middle Eastern nations, the government holds a firm grip on what information is disseminated to its people. This control extends to television, radio, newspapers, and even the rapidly expanding realm of social media. With such a vast reach, these channels become powerful tools for shaping public opinion and maintaining control. These governments often present a narrative that portrays them as benevolent forces, champions of the nation's identity and culture, and defenders against external threats. This narrative frequently contains elements of nationalism, religious symbolism, and historical reverence, all aimed at fostering a sense of unity and loyalty among the populace. Now let's shed some light on the censorship of opposing views. In numerous Middle Eastern countries, dissenting voices are often silenced, suppressed, or discredited. Journalists who dare to challenge the government's narrative may find themselves facing intimidation, imprisonment, or worse. This suppression of dissent is a clear attempt to control the narrative and ensure that the government's version of events remains the dominant one. Social media platforms, while offering a potential avenue for alternative viewpoints, are not immune to this control. Many Middle Eastern governments monitor these platforms closely, ready to clamp down on any content they deem subversive or harmful to their narrative. In this climate of controlled information and suppressed dissent, the impact of propaganda cannot be overstated. It is a tool of control, a means of maintaining power, and a weapon wielded against those who dare to challenge the status quo. In the Middle East, we see the power of propaganda in full display. It is a stark reminder of how words and narratives can be used to shape societies, influence perceptions, and control masses. With the advent of the digital age, the power of propaganda has only amplified. The dawn of the digital era has opened up new channels for the spread of propaganda. It's no longer limited to state-run newspapers or television networks. Today, governments worldwide are harnessing the power of social media and the internet to disseminate their narratives. The rise of social media platforms has provided governments with an unprecedented reach. Messages can be tailored, targeted, and spread with a speed and scale that was unimaginable in the past. These platforms can be used to manipulate public opinion, sow discord, and even incite violence. The impact is significant and the implications are far-reaching. In this digital age, propaganda is no longer a one-way street. It's interactive, it's immediate, it's pervasive. Governments can now engage directly with their citizens, shaping the narrative in real time. But this also means that the potential for misinformation is greater than ever before. Fake news and misinformation have become buzzwords of our time, but they're not just buzzwords, they're powerful tools of modern-day propaganda. By spreading false or misleading information, governments can manipulate public sentiment, stir up fear and confusion, and divert attention from pressing issues. The internet has also given rise to a new form of propaganda, the echo chamber. This is where like-minded individuals reinforce each other's beliefs, creating a feedback loop that amplifies their shared views. Governments can exploit these echo chambers to strengthen their hold over public opinion. But the digital age also presents new challenges for propagandists. Information is more accessible than ever, and people are becoming more critical of what they read and see online. This means that governments need to be more sophisticated in their tactics, using subtle manipulation and psychological techniques to influence their audiences. The digital age has given propaganda a new and potent platform, but it's also given us the tools to recognize and counter it. As we navigate this new era of propaganda, awareness and critical thinking are our best defenses. Understanding how governments use propaganda is the first step towards resisting manipulation. Now, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've discussed so far. We've journeyed from the dawn of propaganda, where words were first wielded as weapons of influence. We've seen how the rise of nation-states introduced a new era of mass manipulation, where propaganda became a tool for maintaining control and furthering national interests. We've walked through the turbulent times of the 20th century, a period marked by the pervasive use of propaganda in shaping public opinion and justifying wars. And we've ventured into the Middle East, a region that has seen propaganda manipulated to inflame conflicts and assert dominance. Now we find ourselves in a new era, an era where propaganda is no longer confined to the realm of governments and media conglomerates. It has infiltrated our social media feeds, our news sources, and our daily conversations. It has become so ingrained in our society that it often goes unnoticed, subtly shaping our perceptions and beliefs. But there is a counterforce to this tide of manipulation, and that counterforce is awareness. Awareness is not a passive state, but an ongoing process. It requires us to question, to scrutinize, to challenge the narratives presented to us. It demands media literacy, a deep understanding of how information is crafted and disseminated. It calls for critical thinking, the ability to separate facts from fiction, to discern the underlying messages hidden beneath layers of rhetoric. Awareness is a shield against manipulation. It empowers us to reject the narratives that seek to control us, to resist the allure of easy answers and comforting lies. It equips us to navigate a world inundated with propaganda, to seek out truth amidst a sea of falsehoods. In this new era, awareness is not a luxury but a necessity. It is our defense against the insidious power of propaganda, our safeguard against manipulation, and it is within our grasp. It is a skill that can be honed, a capacity that can be developed. In a world filled with narratives, the power to discern truth from propaganda lies in our hands.